So I'm currently in Hanoi, Vietnam, and it is absolutely beautiful. If I can show you guys the Airbnb that I have, it's like, look at that lake. So the reason I wanted to make this video is because I happen to be in Vietnam during the 50-year reunification of North and South. And it got me thinking a lot, especially in terms of being a first generation British-born Vietnamese individual. And I think I got a lot of weird feelings when it comes to this. So, I see the celebrations, and I don't think in Hanoi the celebrations are as big as they are in Saigon at the moment, or Ho Chi Minh. But I can still see that, there are flags everywhere. The vibe is very vibrant. People are very, they're very happy, which I think is cool. I've seen on social media, especially in Saigon, yeah, the celebrations are crazy. Like there's a lot of crowds, there's a lot of people. And what I like about Vietnamese people, we have a lot of pride when it comes to our identity as a Vietnamese. And that's something that everybody shares. And I love that about us. The part where I feel a little bit weird about it is because both my parents are from Saigon, and exactly 50 years ago, they both experienced the fall of Saigon. And so they always used to tell me stories of, how their lives were uprooted when they felt as if, the North came and their lives got disrupted. And I remember my father had to go through re-education, and, he's gone to prison for, playing American music, because he used to play guitar. So he played a lot of music in the venues, and obviously as a newly communist regime, you're not allowed to play American music. And a lot of things like, he was a first year undergraduate at university. He couldn't do that anymore. They wanted to so-called re-educate people. And, they seized a lot of property, a lot of things that belonged to people at the time in terms of assets. And at one point, my dad was talking about, how he used to see a lot of people just dead on the street, people getting shot, people that have been shot. And so I understand that there's a lot of trauma that comes to it, There's a lot of trauma that you've experienced where there's a lot of uncertainty and people just coming in, you're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? And all these things are happening, and the life that you knew no longer exists. And so it makes me feel weird in a way, because obviously I can appreciate the powerhouse that Vietnam is and is becoming, and its trajectory. Nobody can deny that. Vietnam is definitely going to be a real powerhouse in Asia in the next, 15, 20 years plus. However, for me to be overly gung-ho about the reunification, personally, would be offensive to my parents' experience and their trauma and the whole reason why they wanted to escape. Now, I've seen on Threads a couple posts where this picked up a lot of traction, where some individual was talking about how, you guys didn't escape anything. You should have just stayed. You left your country. You abandoned it. And all I have to say to that is, look, history is written by the victors, right? You could always say, okay, history could be completely different, if we weren't unified. If we were like North and South Korea, and let's say South Vietnam was now thriving the way that South Korea is, the narrative would be way different. And it's just crazy to me to understand that my parents, what they experienced was 50 years ago, and they're essentially a relic. they're essentially a part of history that unfortunately a lot of people will forget. And I remember seeing a crazy statistic where it was something like 50% of people in Vietnam are under the age of 30 or some nonsense like that. I don't know how true it is or where I even pulled it from, but it's just interesting that, it's going to be very rare to find people who have actually experienced what it's like to be in Saigon in 1975. And so even when I talked to, I met a Vietnamese guy training Muay Thai out in Thailand, and he's only 20 and his parents are like early 50s. And so even if they were around, they were like barely toddlers. So they would have a completely different view. They wouldn't even have experienced the real trauma of, what would have been like. And yeah, as I mentioned, that means, people like my parents are relics. And so I also want to honor their memory and find a path in terms of how I think and how I operate and do things. Because that's the reason I moved to Vietnam. I do like Vietnam. I do enjoy Vietnam. And I do appreciate what Vietnam has become. But I always got to remember why my parents escaped in the first place. And I always tell my friends this. My parents do occupy an interesting space in the sense that whilst they're both from Saigon, growing up in London, they worked with a lot of people from North Vietnam. And they do come back and forth to Vietnam quite a lot. And it's always a journey of discovery, even for myself, when I'm in Saigon with them. Because they're looking around and like, oh, son, like this street, I used to do this, I used to do this. But obviously, it brings such warm memories for them. But at the same time, they're just like, oh yeah, that's the bank that they took all your uncle's money. They seized his money. Or like, oh yeah, I saw somebody, like I saw a corpse on that street. Like, it's kind of nuts. So, I understand that human emotions are complex too, right? So I feel like my heart is kind of filled when I'm kind of on that journey with them and seeing them in their 70s also process a lot of things. And it's interesting just walking that path together with them. And I think, as I said, my parents are in a very unique place in the sense that, they're well-balanced individuals. They worked with a lot of North Vietnamese individuals, and yeah, they're just going through it, man, like just like everyone else. And so, I have my stance on this, but I just need to honor their memory as well, because they are not going to be around that much longer. That's just the reality. And I'm not going to be like, oh, this reunification, this is the best thing ever. No, no, no. Like, sure, yeah, I can join in celebrations, but I'm going to keep it relaxed. I'm going to chill. But at the same time, I'm not going to go on the other end of the spectrum where a lot of individuals are still very bitter and they take on a lot of trauma and knowledge directly from their parents without building any connection to the motherland. Like that, I don't agree with. So I think in everything in life, there needs to be like a balance. So I like the fact that my parents are still coming back and maintain a relationship with Vietnam, but are still trying to process their trauma and understand their journey even now. And I'm more than happy to help them facilitate that as a son. So yeah, that's my take on it. And obviously, people are free to disagree or agree. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.